there are some really bad actors, some people that did some really bad things to the American people. And if they can be charged, we'll charge them. But if they can't be charged, we will name them. And we will name them. And in a culture that respects shame, they should be people that are shamed, and that's a fact. That's the way things work, and so that's how I believe the job operates.
What happened on Earth 1 today, Earth 2? Over on Earth 1, we are living a dramatically different reality, where prosecutors shouldn't just prosecute anyone. They name and shame people they don't like. That was Ed Martin talking about what they're going to do to Trump's perceived enemies. He's the outgoing interim U.S. attorney for D.C., turned director of Trump's so-called DOJ weaponization working group because Republicans rebelled against his confirmation, so he couldn't be confirmed. From NBC News' Ryan Riley, quote, Ed Martin described himself at a press conference as the captain of the group that is investigating prosecutors who launched past investigations into Trump and his allies, quote, including that of former special counsel Jack Smith, any federal cooperation with Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg and New York Attorney General Letitia James, the Justice Department's handling of cases related to the January 6th Capitol attack, and criminal prosecutions of anti-abortion activists, among other issues. It shows how far this administration is going to destroy norms and the rule of law in the United States of America to please Donald Trump and meet his wishes to be treated like a king. It's something that our next guest, former federal judge Michael Luttig, writes about in The Atlantic today. Judge Luttig joins us now. Judge, you've spoken so powerfully about this. I know it's your own peril. Take us through what you've written in The Atlantic.
Well, Nicole, you know, the genesis of the article is this. I've been watching along with all other Americans for the past 3 months, or the president's first 100 days in office. And every day I've been shocked and disgusted. Not all Americans have been shocked or disgusted, but many have. But many, if not most Americans, have been asking throughout these 100 days, does the president really have this power in our constitutional system to issue all of these executive orders and take all of these other actions as president of the United States? And many of those people have asked that question of me. And so as the 100 days closed, I decided that I would compile the various actions that the president had taken, in particular his signature initiatives, and catalog them and present them to the American public in this article in The Atlantic that ran today. The substantive conclusion of the article is that the President of the United States doesn't have the power under the Constitution or laws of the United States for any single one of his signature initiatives undertaken in his first 100 days. I think, and I thought of myself in writing this article as little more than a scrivener or a scribe of the president's actions and their illegality. And I just marshaled, frankly, all of the authority that's out there in the Constitution and the laws of the United States, together with the opinions of the federal courts that have rejected virtually every single initiative that he has taken in his first 100 days, at least preliminarily, if not finally. And that's why that I titled the article as I did, which is The End of the Rule of Law in America. Because when the President of the United States, from the Oval Office, is undertaking illegal initiative after illegal initiative, unconstitutional initiative after unconstitutional initiative, initiative, then we cannot say, at least for the period when he is president of the United States, that we have a government of laws, not of men. The president has presented himself as above the law. I actually say in this article with support that he regards himself as the law. And of course, that's the very antithesis of our founding, the antithesis of our Constitution, and the antithesis of everything that America stands for, Nicole.
Judge, you have incredible reach when you're on this show. I know it's like a boulder thrown in a pond. It ripples for days and days. I wonder what you do, and I ask you this because I'm sometimes in this situation. It is the most Republican thing and the most conservative thing before the time of Trump to write and say out loud everything you put in this piece. But it is viewed as anti-Trump. You are viewed as a voice against Trump. And I think that some of our work is to say, for Trump, against Trump. Being for the rule of law shouldn't make you against anybody, certainly not against a sitting American president. What Trump has done is to pervert the law. We started with a story about him firing 60 years worth of nonpartisan intelligence experts. They'd worked for Democrats and Republicans their whole career. That was their plan for their lives, that no matter which political party won an American election, they would work in the intelligence community to protect America. There's a whole thing that I feel like the pro-democracy movement has seeded, that somehow you're for Trump or against Trump if you're simply articulating the rule of law.
Joining us now, Washington Attorney General Nick Brown, who brought one of the lawsuits that went before the Supreme Court today. That was just one of the interjections we heard from Justice Coney Barrett. But was there anything you heard from her today, from Justice Kavanaugh in particular, that surprised you, gave you hope for your side? Give me your analysis of what you heard today.
Well, sure. Thank you, Chris. I think we heard from justices of all stripes a lot of skepticism about the legal arguments that were being made by the Department of Justice today. Not only on the more procedural arguments about the scope of nationwide injunctions, but many justices started to get to the heart of the issue about what it means to be an American and the really 100+ years of precedent from the Supreme Court and Congress and others about reestablishing that if you're born on American soil, that you are in fact an American. But many of the justices really struggled with the Department of Justice's arguments that this wouldn't apply universally. And really, I think it started to unravel the absurdity of some of these legal arguments. The idea that you would be born in my home state of Washington, but that you could cross across the border into Idaho and you would lose all the rights and privileges that comes with being an American. I think a lot of justices really struggled with that idea.
The Solicitor General, who, of course, for folks who don't know, argued on behalf of the government, was grilled on the practicality of ending those nationwide injunctions. And I want you to listen to that, and we'll talk about it on the other side.
Your theory here is arguing that Article 3 and principles of equity both prohibit federal courts from issuing universal injunctions. Do I have your argument correct?
We argue both of those. And
you argue both of those?
Yeah.
If that's true, that means even the Supreme Court doesn't have that power.
The Supreme Court would have the authority to issue binding precedent nationwide. But as
we couldn't enforce it against universally, is your argument.
If there was a decision that violated the precedent of the court, then the affected plaintiffs could get a separate judgment.
And that means you're talking about the hundreds and thousands of people who weren't part of the judgment of the court. They would all have to file individual actions?
Not necessarily.
Or a class action.
A class action would be
Isn't that makes no sense whatsoever.
That line of questioning, actually, and I'm sure you know, stretched beyond Justice Sotomayor. You know, a lot of this was about, and we heard a little bit of it there, practicality arguments, but also how it should be applied. Obviously, that is at the heart of it. What did you hear in that exchange and overall about the execution of how the courts can and should operate?
Well, Chris, a couple additional things really stood out for me, and Justice Sotomayor really hit on the heart of the issue when she made an analogy to the Department of Justice's arguments when it comes to gun rights in America and the Second Amendment rights that so many Americans enjoy. And she asked, you know, what if a President Biden or a prior president had come in and said, no American has the right to possess a firearm anymore. And extending the arguments that were made today, that would mean that each individual gun owner or a class action of gun owners could only get relief individually if they were bound together. And the arguments that were made today were suggest that a court couldn't enjoin that nationwide, which is really, really absurd. And the other thing that I really want to key on is that the court pressed and pressed and pressed about, whether the Department of Justice would commit to following one of the circuit courts weighing in on this issue. And they asked whether if the Second Circuit in the United States weighed in and said, in fact, birthright citizenship is your right, whether or not the Department of Justice would abide by that. And time again, they caveated their commitment to that by saying, yes, generally we would, but not unequivocally. And the idea that the Department of Justice is saying in the highest court of the land that they wouldn't commit to following an order from one of our circuit courts in America is really, really frankly shocking. And it shows the bounds by which the Department of Justice now is being stretched to defend what we see time and time from the President of the United States is unlawfulness and lawlessness. And we can't abide by that as Attorney Generals representing our states.
You sound, Mr. Attorney General, as though you have at least some level of confidence based on the arguments that you heard today. But I wonder, and I know a lot of the attorneys general talk to each other, particularly Democratic attorneys general, and I wonder if you've had conversations about the impact and what you would do if the ruling doesn't go your way.
Well, I think, today's arguments were principally around the scope of nationwide injunctions and whether they should apply in this case. And as the justices really parsed out today, that is a pretty bipartisan concern that nationwide injunctions are being used too frequently. And I can see the justices really struggling with that. And so I'm not sure that how they will come out on that issue. But I am certain that when they get to the merits of this issue about birthright citizenship and the 150 years of precedent that's been established in America, defining what it means to America, and that they will ultimately reach that decision.
Like Trump lawyers and Trump-aligned, at least ideologically lawyers, have given up on him. You see longtime Republican lawyers give up on him. Give up on the idea that Trump is a good president, given that Trump is a constitutionally respecting president. Giving up on the idea that he represents conservative values, at least, non-fascistic conservative values. Because there are differences between conservatives and fascists, right? There's a little bit of an overlap, but there are differences. And it's also the case that his lawyers are giving up on quitting on even making a good argument in these cases. Through a mixture of, one, it's got to be hard to represent Trump in a trial because he often doesn't give you the best ammunition. Two, I think there is this sense that his own lawyers in some ways believe that if Trump's above the law, then it doesn't matter that their arguments are good or bad or in between, that they'll just get their way. And three, a lot of them just know they're cooked. And you can quiet quit, as we talked about during the pandemic, or I mean the whole phenomenon of people quiet quitting, where like you don't actually legally quit, formally quit, but you stop doing the work and just collect the paycheck and sit there and do nothing, or half-ass your work or quarter-ass your work. This is what's happening right now. Donald is failing. His lawyers are flailing. And some of them, even if only metaphorically, are at the exit door.